Dionysus went into India that refused him. Dionysus Osiris is also Krishna in Hindu mythology. This king, Dareides, would not let him in, didn't want him in his area, wouldn't accept it. They went to war for 9 years. That's in these books. And Dionysus ended up killing him. And so all of India was converted to the mystery of these cronides, and they learned how to grow all this food and have abundance and were peaceful. I believe the Birdman cults are based on Dionysus Osiris. Osiris had the feathers in his hair, right? These are feathers. Crook and flail, what do you use that for? Well, you use the flail for the wheat and the crook for the sheep. That's what this is. And she helped as well. And you know who this Isis is that I've figured out in these books from Nonus? That's a Radney out of Crete. That would have been one of his relatives. King Minos was the son of Zeus, and I think it was Europa when he kidnapped her, but they made a kingdom on Crete. And Pasiphae married King Minos, and she had children. One of them was Ariadne. She's famous for the story of the Minotaur in the labyrinth. I don't want to get into too much of that, but Theseus, she helped Theseus kill her half-brother, who was the Minotaur, but he abandoned her on an island, Naxos. That's written about in these books by Nonus, called the Dionysica. The Dionysica is the complete story of Dionysus Osiris until he met Ariadne. It tells you that's his wife. He found her in Naxos after Theseus abandoned her and married her. Now, these books tell you that there's several versions. She may have killed herself, she may have died. I think that they just left and reinvented themselves in Egypt. She was embarrassed by her past in Crete. But they tell you his story in these books. Okay, so now I want to read a little bit more. This is also from Dionysus, or from Diodorus Siculus. Osiris was the first, they record, to make mankind give up cannibalism. For after Isis did discover the fruit of both wheat and barley, which grew wild over the land, along with other plants, but was still unknown to man, and Osiris had also devised the cultivation of these fruits, all men were glad to change their food, both because of the pleasing nature of the newly discovered grains and because it seemed to their advantage to refrain from the butchery of one another. As proof of the discovery of these fruits, they offer the following ancient custom which they still observe. Even yet at harvest time, the people make a dedication of the first heads of the grain to be cut, and standing beside the sheaf, beat themselves and call upon Isis. By this act, rendering honor to the goddess for the fruits which she discovered at the season when she first did this. Moreover, in some cities during the festival of Isis as well, stalks of wheat and barley are carried among the other objects in the procession as a memorial of what the goddess so ingeniously discovered at the beginning. Isis also established laws, they say, in accordance with which the people regularly disperse justice to one another, and are let to refrain through fair punishment from illegal violence and insolence. And it is for this reason also that the early Greeks gave Demeter the name Thesmophorus, acknowledging in this way that she had first established her laws. Now here again, you get a little bit of issues because Demeter was a separate goddess and she also worked with the grains, but she was in Sicily. That's told in these books. She was out in Sicily with Hestia and Hecate. Hecate was their cousin. And they were creating their cults. And they came up, as I said, Persephone was Demeter's daughter, but they came up with the mystery schools to tell the story of what had happened to Persephone. Those are the Eleusinian mysteries. That's what those are about, as well as the Orphic. Ophic is a different mystery, and that's something that has nothing really to do with this. But sometimes these writers tell you that some of the stories kind of overlap because some of the people did the same thing, or there's multiple people with the same name, but they generally try and give you the story as much as they can, the right person. Okay, Zeus and Dionysus Osiris traveled the world. It tells you that in these books. It says, and by the way, here's a timeline, which is also in these books. The number of years from Osiris and Isis, they say, to the reign of Alexander, who founded the city which bears his name in Egypt, is over 10,000. But according to other writers, a little less than 23,000. Well, Alexander the Great lived about 2,300 years ago. This puts this timeline between 12,000 and 25,000 years ago that these people lived. And I also looked at a book by Manetho. Manetho lists out all of the rulers and pharaohs of Egypt and gives timelines. And his goes back, depending on how you interpret it, it could be anywhere from like 36,000 to 24,000 to 15,000 years ago. But just based on what I'm kind of learning, I put it between like 15 and 19,000 years ago. But this is a timeline. They're telling you when these people existed. And what happened around there was that flood, right? That they keep talking about, this flood. Well, Zeus was the god of the flood. And I said Zeus fought the Titans and his fathers. So Zeus overcame him in battle, and on gaining supreme power, visited all the inhabited world, conferring benefactions upon the race of men. They'll also tell you that Dionysus Osiris did the same thing as well. Okay, I've studied this for a long time, but you really have to have access to and knowledge about this library to put it all together. If you don't, you're just getting the mythologies and the symbolism and some of the oral tradition. And you start, like I said, I started to see that they were all the same, but this puts it together. Not only puts it together, but it tells you the multiple names of these gods, as I've shown you some of it. The key, when I figured this out, was the murdered son, because you know that Osiris was murdered by Set. There's always a murder of a son in these mythologies. Balder is murdered. In Celtic mythology, they had a god that was murdered. Dionysus is murdered. Tammuz is murdered. There you go. Redhorn, I think he goes. I have to look that one up. That would be Native American. That's a whole nother story, a whole different mythology that talks about red-haired people in America. Zeus is also Odin. Proof? Snorri Sturluson's The Prose Edda. In his Gylfaginning, he says, next they made for themselves in the middle of the world a city which is called Asgard. Men call it Troy. Asgard is Troy. It's telling you. And whose son died? Odin's son. Balder, just as Dionysus died. That's the key. I told you about these books, the Dionysica by Nonus. I just want to point out, this is Krishna. I told you about Zagreus being the second Dionysus. Some will call him the first, but him being reincarnated as the third Dionysus, which is Osiris. What do we always see for Dionysus? He's shown as a child baby drinking wine and as an adult. So is Krishna. Krishna is always shown as a child and an adult with a flute. Some comparative symbolism. Right? There's Dionysus, the child and the adult. This is a picture of Dionysus battling the Indians out of Rome. That's written about in Nonus. He conquered the Indians. Here's the mosaic of it. Right there. And these were his Menades and the people that helped him. There it is. So I connected all these mythologies, even the Asian mythologies, the Jade Emperor. It's the same as Zeus and all of these. I started to just see that they're all connected, even the Polynesian ones. Here's a picture of Kokopelli out in the southwest with a little bit of a hump and a flute. There's Krishna. Pretty similar. So I just started to make charts, and this is an ongoing process for me because I always find books that I learn more. And like I said, this library is over 500 books, and I maybe have read like 50 of them. I don't know what else is in that library yet to find. So I just started to go through all of these generations. You gotta think of it, there's generations and they have their stories, and then it's the next generation takes over, and the next and the next. But then you start comparing the names. And by the way, this would be Uranus killing this Anu, Uranus from Sumer killing the great goddess. He killed her. That's in Sumerian mythology. He killed Tiamat. They killed her and took over. You got to start connecting. This would be the second generation. It's always the husband and the wife, or the main man and woman. The next generation, I'm still working on their equivalents. Uranus and Gaia, they're part of the Egyptian Ogden. There's 8 gods and goddesses in the Egyptian Ogden, represented by frogs and snakes, if I recall correctly. That's these people. They're in it. And all those previous 3 generations I just showed you, that's part of it. That's the old gods and goddesses. Cronus I equate with Shu, Saturn, Boar, and I'm still going to work on this because I still have yet, this is just ongoing. Like I said, as I get new information, I learn something else. El, in Lil, I'll even tell you with the Gnostic writings, they tell you that this Yaldabaoth was put in Tartarus. They say it in there, which is the same thing that happened to Cronus. He's the demiurge. That's who they kicked down so Zeus can take over. Rhea, that's the wife. Zeus, he's the big one. All of these names. All of those. And I'm underworld Hades, all Father God. In Santeria, even in Santeria, start looking at their gods and goddesses. Shango. Even though they'll represent these gods and goddesses as the people that god and goddess is from, start looking at the story, start looking at the symbols, start making the connections, but there will always be variations. And there'll be some that have gods and goddesses, I don't know who they are, I'm trying to figure that out. They don't fit in some of these main groups. Hera, one of his wives. Demeter, another wife, but sister wife. Oh, well, let me back that up. She looks pretty big, right? To that, compared to that guy. Look what she's doing. Don't you priests do that? Don't you popes do that? That's a Chronide blessing. Let me back that up a minute. What's he doing? Go look at some of your popes. That's a Chronide blessing. They're the same thing. Symbolism. Compare. Start looking at what she's doing. And she's big. Talk about that in a minute. She doesn't. That's Hestia. The Vestal Virgins were associated with her. Poseidon. He had his own descendants, and he's equated with Atlantis. But there were people before these people, because he married the woman that was already there. All of these children of Zeus, they were real people, and they got different names. Actually, I'm changing this. Bridget would be more Athena, but like I said, as I continue on, I learn more, and I've got other books that tell me more things. But there's confusion between the Aphrodites and the Ishtars and the Inanas and the Ashtaroths. This was a daughter of Zeus who was married to Hephaestus, who had a clubfoot. She hated him. She wasn't attracted to him. She had an affair with his brother Ares, and then he kicked her out. She went up into Mesopotamia and started her queendoms as Ishtar and Inanna, and one of her lovers was Dionysus Osiris. That's in these books. He wanted to marry her daughter, but the daughter was promised to Poseidon, but he ended up having an affair with her, and I think she had a child. She had children by many men. This was a rarity because it was usually the men having children with many different women. But she kind of went against that grain. That's why she's the goddess of love. She had many lovers and many children by them. They didn't like that, but she did it. But there was, like I said, there was a different goddess, Ashtaroth, who's the half-sister of Cronus, who had many children with Cronus. And she's the goddess of war. Those two tend to get confused. It's not the same person. A lot of people confuse those two. They call them like the whore of Babylon. It's not the same. Ashtaroth was Phoenician. This is Mesopotamian. This would be your Aphrodite. Athena went into Ireland. You can get into the stories. She ended up marrying one of the kings, the Fomorian kings, to settle the battle. The Tuatha Dé Danann are the Cronites. And they went in there, and the Fomorians were doing disgusting human sacrifice on the Numidians' children to control them and use them. They stopped it. She married the king, King Bree, and he ended up dying. She married somebody else, and she took it over. And then eventually the Molassians out of Egypt came up through Spain and into it. But that's in a lot of the mythological cycles of Ireland. Like I said, this gets very complex. But if you're getting the point that these people went all over the place and created queendoms and kingdoms. They set up the royal houses, these Cronites. And they got rid of a lot of the problems that Cronus and the Titans had done before, because they were out traveling, setting up their things that weren't good. So you have two sides of the family that were fighting to control the planet and get into these royal houses, and one side was just doing nasty things to people,